perfect for drifting. They're fun on a winding road. They look great, and they're big enough to fit your whole family. It's a JDM import that only recently has begun to get some attention here in the States. This is the Toyota Chaser JZX90. Right next to me is my 1993 Toyota Chaser Tourer V. This is a 5th generation Chaser with the chassis code X90, and it's more commonly known by enthusiasts as the JZX90. Now, this Chaser is the first vehicle that I've ever imported. I had it shipped on a boat from Japan late last year, and now it's become my go-to vehicle for almost everything. We never got the Chaser here in the States. We did get the previous generation Cressidas, which were related to the Chasers, but the JZX90 never made it over here. My Chaser is a Tourer V, which means it's the, quote, sportiest model from '93 with a turbocharged 1JZ motor rated at 276 horsepower. In reality, it's probably quite a bit more. A factory R154 manual transmission, and it still has plenty of space for passengers and stuff, and even a pond in the trunk, but more on that in a bit. And it's probably clear, but this JZX90 is far from stock. It's got a body kit, a front-mounted intercooler, and a whole lot of other JDM goodies. But even with these mods, it's still kind of a sleeper, unless you know what you're looking at, or you hear the amazing sound of the 1JZ. But to most people, it just kind of looks like a spicy Camry. If you've spent any amount of time watching JDM cars drift, chances are you're aware of the Toyota Chaser. But if not, here's a little Chaser history lesson. Way back in 1968, Toyota introduced the compact Corona Mark II. Prior to its introduction, Toyota was mostly known for smaller economy cars. The slightly larger Mark II helped the company build a name for itself as a manufacturer of mainstream vehicles, allowing Toyota to expand its reach globally.
Hold on now, Mark II.
Success of the Mark II grew, and 2 additional variations of the car were introduced using different approaches to styling, marketing, and sales channels. The Chaser came about in 1977 as a sportier version of the Mark II.
新しい生き物が生まれた。しなやかな動きで迫る美しい野生。チェイサー!
And the Cresta appeared in 1980 as a luxury model. The first generation Chaser was available as a compact 2-door coupe and a 4-door sedan, but every subsequent gen was a mid-size 4-door sedan only. My favorite in terms of styling is the JZX90 Chaser, and that's one of the main reasons why I bought one.
New Chaser.
New Chaser. Danjo.
Chaser.
Especially the Tourer V, the sportiest version. In stock form, the Chaser Tourer V is a fantastic, competent, and extremely powerful grand touring sedan. Toyota continued to improve things with the JZX100, including variable valve timing on the engine. As the stellar reputation of these cars began to spread, along with the growing awareness that the 1JZ motor could make big power with bolt-on mods, it wasn't long before these became a staple of the Japanese drifting scene. And the JZX100 would go racing too. The Chaser won many Japanese touring car championship races. Production of the Chaser ended in 2001 after a 24-year run, and it was replaced with the Verosa, a terrible, terrible abomination of car design. Okay, let's take a look under the hood. So it's got a 2.5-liter twin turbocharged dual overhead cam, 1JZ GTE inline 6-cylinder motor. It has a custom intake box, and the previous owner obviously loved the color blue because everything in here is blue. It's rated at 276 horsepower from the factory. Now I'm boring and I'm just running stock boost, but these things are capable of making some huge power with the right mods. A lot of people love to call the JZX90 a 4-door Supra, and while that may not exactly be the case for the newer JZX100 I recently reviewed, I agree it makes some sense for this JZX90, as the Supra got the same twin-turbo 1JZ GTE motor. What's really incredible is that you have all of this insane Supra-like performance in a practical 4-door sedan. So on the inside, it looks like a pretty normal car from the 90s, but what we have to talk about is what used to be in here. So when I first got this car, we immediately discovered that it had like 100 pounds of extra wiring in it. Wiring for old stereo systems, lighting systems, and all sorts of other stuff that we just couldn't really figure out. There was a solar panel controller in here. There were magnets and ferrites everywhere, wrapped around all of the wires, even wrapped around the cooling hoses. It didn't make any sense. There was a mesh snake that my mechanic pulled out of the gas tank. Couldn't figure out why in the hell that was there. And in the back there was a pond. Where the spare tire should go, there was this fiberglass pond that apparently had a pump in it. And at car shows, you would fill it with water and put fish in there. So yeah, this car has had a lot of stuff done to it. Apparently, a lot of modded JDM cars get subjected to tons of wiring, but my mechanic had never ever seen a car like this in all of his years working on imported cars. This is by far, hands down, the worst he'd ever seen. But after hours and hours of removing wires and magnets and unused electronics, everything in here pretty much works now. Yeah, there's a few minor interior things that I still need to fix, but in general, it's a pretty nice place to be. I did replace the super cheap and incredibly flimsy aftermarket steering wheel, and now I've got a much higher quality Momo steering wheel. So you've got the usual suspects like boost controller, turbo timer, and you might notice the gauge cluster is from an automatic transmission car, but this is a factory manual transmission car. And I'm guessing what happened is it probably came with a TRD cluster, which are worth a ton of money, and someone likely ripped it out and sold it before this car ever made it to auction. So the odometer says 99,000 kilometers, and according to my mechanic, based on the condition of the body, the undercarriage, the transmission, the motor, he believes that that's probably correct. And it has this pretty cool fold-out stereo system, and this was pretty popular in the early 2000s. Automatic climate control system, which was a pretty big deal in '93. A bunch of switches down here that look like they used to be for lights or some underglow or something like that, but they don't do anything anymore. And it was a very JDM thing in the late 90s and early 2000s to rip out the glove box and put gauges where the glove box was. You can see that Trust logo, that's straight out of the 90s. So I kind of like this throwback JDM look, but at the same time, I do kind of wish I just still had a glove box. I'm just gonna leave it though. So yeah, the interior is a bit plain, but it's unfussy, and like I said, it's pretty comfortable. And it's such a great nostalgia trip back to early 1990s Toyota. It sounds so good. Okay, so I'm terrible at drifting, so I will not subject you to my ungraceful attempts to go sideways, but rest assured, with the right mods and the right driver, it definitely can be done. But what I will gladly do is get out of the city and spend some time on one of my favorite canyon roads, which I'm on right now. Now, obviously this car is lowered on coilovers and the setup is geared a bit more towards looking good than it is for a drive on a canyon road. The tires do regularly rub the fenders, and I suppose the wheel spacers that came on the car that I never bothered to remove aren't really helping either. So if I really wanted to dial this in, I'd have to lose those spacers and maybe select a different wheel and tire combination. Maybe even just removing the spacers might do the trick. And all that said, this car is really quick and it handles really well. The ride is a bit stiff, as you might expect, but it's not like back-breaking stiff, and it's not so low that you scrape on speed bumps. It's at a livable height. Driving this car can actually be quite pleasant if you just want to get around. It's a nice sedan that can comfortably fit 4 adults and a bunch of stuff in the trunk. This was meant to be a sporty luxury grand tourer after all. Now these 1JZ GTE motors can be modded for some pretty insane horsepower numbers, but we're not too far from stock right here. I think we're right around 300 horsepower, and that's really quite powerful for 1993. Yeah, sure, it's not like super impressive by today's standards, but it's certainly quick enough to get you into some serious trouble, either with the law or the laws of physics. And when you really get on the throttle, yeah, it's pretty nuts. It just goes and goes. And if you want, it's not too terribly difficult to get the tail end to slide out. So just do that on a skid pad and not in your grandma's neighborhood. Now I'm gonna pull over real quick and show you something pretty cool with this exhaust. And this car has a fancy aftermarket exhaust, but what's really interesting is the muffler right here, especially the exhaust tip. So what's kind of interesting is that it has this movable inner piece right here, so it stays in place when you're at low RPM, so it's really quiet around town or in your neighborhood. But when you're out here in the middle of nowhere, then you can step on it and the exhaust pressure pushes this part out, and it really makes the vehicle sound quite amazing. But the sound of this engine and exhaust combo are just so musical. It's one of my favorite sounding engines. And you get that lovely sound of the twin turbos spooling up, and that satisfying whoosh sound of the blow-off valve when you let off the throttle. It's just wonderful. But to be honest, I'm really not a fan of loud cars, at least loud cars in the city. Out here, kind of all for it. But if your shitty Infiniti G35 with a shotgun tune drives by my house at 3 a.m., I'm going to hate you forever. I'm trying to sleep, just stop it. Okay, let's talk about the R154 transmission that we've got right here. It's not my favorite. I've driven 4 cars with this transmission, and they've all pretty much had sort of vague and spongy gearboxes and felt like you might be breaking something getting it into gear. And this one right here is the best out of everyone that I've tried. So yeah, it's not nearly as good as the transmission that I had in my Civic Type R. Even that terrible 2005 Altima I had for 2 months felt like it shifted better than this thing. Okay, so that's pretty harsh. These transmissions can be built to withstand a ton of power, so I'm okay if it's not the most refined thing on the planet. But honestly, that's really my only complaint with this car. I love nearly everything about this vehicle. And the one fantastic thing about a Chaser is that with all of this performance and all of the enjoyment that it provides, it's still surprisingly practical. It's great to cart around your kids. A Chaser like this really could become a solid daily driver, and that's kind of what it's become for me. When JZ parts are available here in the States, and there's a solid community out there to help you with these cars. And because this car is a bit older, you can actually see out of it. This car is from an era where outward visibility was still a thing. Driving a new crossover is like driving a cave. The pillars are super thick, the belt lines are way too high, visibility out the back is often a joke. So yeah, much of that is in the name of passenger safety, but it makes it way harder to see out of, to see pedestrians, and to judge your distances from obstacles. So in this car, you can actually, for real, see out of it. Okay, when it comes to safety, we do have to admit that there are indeed no airbags in here, so maybe not exactly the safest vehicle on the road for its occupants. Okay, so what if you're in the States and you want a JZX90? Chasers, Crestas, and Mark IIs are seeing a spike in popularity, which also means prices are going up. There aren't that many that have been imported to the US. And depending on exactly what you're going for, the range of prices can be pretty wide. An automatic, unmodified Chaser is going to be a lot cheaper, but one with a manual is going to be a lot more expensive, especially a Tourer V. So I recently saw a JZX90 for sale that was very similar to mine with very tastefully done mods, imported to the States, and it was listed for 25 grand, so not exactly a bargain. But if you absolutely must have one, with a bit of digging, you can probably find one. Or if you're a bit more adventurous, you can go through the process of importing one. Now, I've been thinking a lot about why I like driving this vehicle so much, and it's not because it draws attention, though it does kind of do that a little bit. I really like driving this vehicle because it's a reminder to myself that you don't have to do what everyone else does. You don't have to conform or fit in. And I'm not even really talking about cars, it's kind of a metaphor. Just because society says you have to be a certain way doesn't mean shit. Make your own path. This car is a reminder for me to do the same, to not fall into the trap of what everyone else thinks you should be. Chasers have become much more known here in the States than they were just a few years ago. This spicy Camry has gotten way more thumbs up and waves than any other vehicle I've driven recently. There may not be that many Chasers in the US, but it seems pretty clear that it's no longer a hidden gem. There is certainly an appeal to an elegant sedan with the performance of a Supra, but you can actually fit your family and friends inside. These cars are now 3 decades old, and a lot of us that were hooked on Gran Turismo and JDM culture as kids finally have nostalgia for these super rad sedans. If you want to relive those drifting memories from the late 90s and early 2000s, there may not be a cooler choice than the JZX90. Thanks so much for watching. If you like this video, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon. If you want to help support the show, please consider buying a Hello Road t-shirt. Thanks again. I hope you're well. See you soon.